I've had a few teachers in my life, the first of which was Richard Sparks, whom I met in 1999 when I was a sophomore at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Texas. Prior to meeting Richard, I'd grown up in a fairly conservative Christian suburb of Houston, Texas. There wasn't much in the way of spirituality. I had encountered a Zen meditation group at the First Universalist Unitarian Church downtown that I would occasionally visit. But aside from that, and the New Age section at Barnes & Noble, there wasn't much to feed me in my interest in spirituality. But thankfully, I met a real person who had had real experiences, and that was Richard Sparks. How I came to meet him was this. I was friends with Jeff, and I would, whenever he would listen, talk to Jeff about Castaneda and consciousness and these interests. And he was in the physics department and didn't kind of look down on all that woo-woo stuff. But nonetheless, one day he came to me and he was like, Michael, you should look into this man named Gurdjieff. I can't tell you more than that. I was like, come on, man. Like, why are you being so spooky about it? He's like, it's just the way it is. It's like, okay, fine. So this is kind of before the big days of the internet, so I had to actually go to a bookstore. I went to the 2 used bookstores in Lubbock, Texas, and looked for anything by Gurdjieff. At the second place I went to, there were books too deep. So I would take the first row of books off and look for anything by Gurdjieff and then put the books back. I went through several shelves until I eventually arrived at this interesting book, it caught my eye, called Psychological Commentaries, Volume 1, Nickel. N-I-C-O-L-L. Okay, well, let's take a look at this. So I took out the book, and it says the Psychological Commentaries on the teachings of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, Volume 1, by Maurice Nicole. It's like, yes, I found it. I found a book. Interestingly, there was an inscription in the book that said, "You will be one of many in the work. May your light give an example to those in need of it." I'm like, okay. So picked up that book and immediately went to Jeff's apartment. But Jeff wasn't there. Instead, there were 2 men that I hadn't met, Jonathan and John. And I came to them and I said, hey, Jeff told me about this guy, Gurdjieff, and I found like the only book in town that had anything to do with him. And Jonathan took the book and he looked at it and he says, well, it looks like you're in. In what? In the work. I was like, okay, all right. So you were in that meditation? Well, like, tell me about what's going on. And he described having been part of a meditation group, a private meditation group, led by his teacher, Richard. I said, I have to meet Richard. Like, this is so important to me. He said, well, Richard hangs out at J&B Coffee, and you'll encounter him there. I was like, okay. So I started spending as much time there at that coffee shop as I could. And one day, this old man with brown-gray hair and a ponytail, a baseball cap, this kind of long, scraggly beard, wearing a blue windbreaker, a t-shirt and jeans and oversized sneakers. He rides up on a bicycle and sits it down, lights up a cigarette, and is hanging out. Jonathan is there as well, and he points this guy out and he says, go talk to him. I'm like, okay. So I talk with him. It turns out that it's Richard. And, I was super eager. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so interested in spirituality. I heard that you're interested in it. And he was so funny. He was being cagey. He was being sly and cryptic, and was clearly having fun doing that. But eventually he opened up a bit. And he asked me these questions. What is the soul? Define consciousness. And I would answer the best that I could as a 19-year-old kid. Eventually, we entered into a friendship and informal mentorship, and he described his life experiences being a very empathic person. And he also described his meetings with other spiritual people who had special gifts or special experiences. And so I would say the biggest gift that Richard gave to me was his friendship, and that I was not alone, because I felt very alone, in being a spiritual person and interested in these questions, and not interested in so much in the usual things of life. And he showed me that I was not alone in that. That was a tremendous gift. And I still value it to this day. I'm very grateful to have a spiritual person as my wife, whom I can share these experiences and discuss things, and we can be with each other in that. But Richard was the first person to really share that kind of friendship with. But it's important to discuss his failures. Richard had a difficult upbringing. He claimed that he was that his father was involved in organized crime. His mother had been a waitress at a Playboy club in California, and that's where she met her husband, Richard's father. So Richard's father was a very hard man, and his mother had him when he was very young. Richard did not want to participate in the family business, so he went his own way. With kind of severe dyslexia, school was very difficult for him. Eventually, he found his way through life, and he met a woman who had immigrated from mainland China and had become a nurse in California. He fell in love with her, married her, but having been married to an Asian woman myself, the expectations culturally within a marriage are very different than the American concept of family life. Eventually, those cultural differences caused a difficult divorce. He felt ignored by her, and in a very deep and tragic way. So he had a divorce. He became estranged from his ex-wife and his young daughter, Joanne. Eventually, I think he started turning to drinking. Also, Richard's mother died under tragic circumstances, and that deeply affected him so strongly that he had a medical emergency. An aorta behind his stomach burst, and he very, very nearly died. Laying there on the operating table as they pump unit after unit of blood into him, he remembers seeing two doctors, and the two doctors told him he would be all right. During his recovery in the hospital, he asked about these two doctors, and the nurse said, "There aren't any doctors by that description working here." Also, while on the operating table, his spirit left his body, and he looked down and saw this poor guy cut open, and the doctors digging in his abdomen, trying to repair the bleeding. So that was one of a significant spiritual experience that he had had. But anyway, he suffered tragedy after tragedy. The alcoholism and the problems with his blood flow eventually led to him getting frostbite on his feet, and he lost a few toes. And this was a constant source of pain and suffering for him later in life. When I met him, he was maybe in his 60s or so, late 60s. And he had become addicted to painkillers. And it was sad to see him when he was kind of knocked out by that stuff. So it showed me that through his example, that you can be a deep feeling spiritual person and life might actually be more painful to you. You might be less able to cope with the meat grinder that life can be with those heightened sensitivities. I tried to keep in touch with him. He was a difficult person in that regard. I was able, at his request, to locate Joanne, his daughter, and put them on the phone with each other after, I don't know, decades of silence. Unfortunately, he wasn't really able to rekindle a relationship with her. She'd kind of written him off long ago. But I think that was one of the last times that I saw him in person, which was maybe 2011 or 2012. He died a couple of years later, as I learned from a friend of a friend in Lubbock. So I'm very grateful to Richard for showing me that I wasn't a sheep, that I was in fact a spiritual being, and that was okay, and I should embrace that. And he also taught me that if you don't find a way to deal with the tragedies in your life, they will break you. Thank you for listening to me tell a story about a beloved friend and a beloved teacher. Next, I'll be talking about some of my yoga teachers and how they became very nasty people.